You wake up every morning, you move through your routines, you speak the right words, you fulfill your responsibilities, but deep inside, in a place you rarely dare to visit, something is longing for more. Not longing because something is broken, longing because there is a part of you designed for a depth of life you have only glimpsed in rare moments. Watchman Nee discovered something beautiful that transforms everything. Millions of sincere believers are living on the surface of what God intended, not because they lack devotion or sincerity, but simply because no one ever showed them a different way. He found that there are simple practices, accessible to anyone willing to try them, that when applied daily, do not just add to your spiritual life, they unlock dimensions of connection, clarity, and aliveness you never knew were possible. This is not about doing more or trying harder. This is about discovering what has been waiting for you all along, hidden in plain sight, ready to awaken the moment you learn how to access it. What Watchman Nee experienced changed not only his own life, but the lives of countless others who dared to walk this path with him. He realized that the Christianity most people know feels incomplete, not because God is distant, but because we have been taught to walk alone when we were designed to walk together. In this video, you will discover why the individualistic approach to spirituality keeps your spirit stunted, how God distributes His fullness across many members so that no one can claim completeness alone, and what happens when you learn to submit to spiritual authority, receive from others, and allow the friction of corporate life to shape you. You will understand why isolation, even when disguised as deep personal devotion, eventually produces spiritual sickness, and how the daily practice of living as a connected member of the body unlocks transformation that private devotion could never achieve. The richness, the fullness, the breakthrough you hunger for does not come from more information or deeper personal discipline alone. It comes from learning to live in the flow of shared life that God intended from the beginning. What you are about to discover is not hidden knowledge reserved for the elite. It is an open invitation to step into the fullness that has been offered to you all along, waiting only for you to say yes. There is something Watchman Nee repeats in different ways. Most people move, decide, and plan their entire lives, yet never truly touch the deepest part of themselves. They think about God, they feel emotions about God, they talk about spiritual things, but their spirit remains like a room with the door half closed, dimly lit, rarely entered. This is why so many feel an invisible exhaustion that no rest, no entertainment, no achievement manages to heal. The problem is not only what they do, but from where they do it, from the soul that runs, argues, and wavers, rather than from the spirit that discerns, receives, and obeys. And this is exactly where the daily practice that Watchman Nee discovered becomes a dividing line between a superficial life and a genuinely spiritual life. For Watchman Nee, the greatest tragedy is not the external storms, but a believer who has Christ dwelling in the spirit, and yet lives as if this inner sanctuary were almost unused. He explains that God chose the spirit of man as his home, not the mind as a conference room for debates, nor the emotions as a stage for fleeting inspiration. When you live only in your thoughts and feelings, you can even talk about faith, but deep inside, you remain empty, restless, divided. It is like someone living in the courtyard, while the true treasure remains locked in the inner chamber. The daily practice he discovered is nothing other than learning, every single day, to return to this inner place, to recognize it, to cooperate with it, and to allow the Spirit to govern instead of merely decorating your vocabulary with spiritual terms. Watchman Nee insists that there is a sharp difference between activity for God and life from God. A person can be involved in ministry, projects, service, and yet operate almost entirely from human energy, human wisdom, human emotion. On the surface, this looks impressive. Inside, however, the spirit remains suffocated, almost like a voice speaking behind a wall. That is why so many reach the end of the day emotionally drained, mentally overloaded, and spiritually almost mute. The daily practice he points to is this: to stop, to turn within, and to acknowledge the presence of Christ in the Spirit, not as a doctrine, but as a living reality that can direct, correct, strengthen, and silence the noise of the soul. When this becomes a habit, your entire inner landscape begins to change. One of the central insights of Watchman Nee is that God does not want to strengthen your natural self so that you become a better version of the same old person. He wants to express the life of his Son through your spirit, and for that, the soul needs to learn to yield, to bow, to stay quiet when the Spirit speaks. In practical terms, this means that, day after day, you begin your inner movements, not by asking, "What do I think?" or "What do I feel?" but "What is the Spirit witnessing in my interior?" This simple shift, repeated daily, becomes a profound practice that realigns motives, rearranges priorities, and exposes illusions that before seemed logical. Little by little, you notice that reactions change, words change, even silences gain a new quality, because they no longer come only from mental effort, but from a life quietly flowing from the Spirit. This is why Watchman Nee says that the Christian life is not primarily an effort to climb up to God, but a learning to let the life that is already in the Spirit govern the rest of the being. The daily practice, he discovered, is not mystical performance, nor emotional intensity, but a continuous exercise of turning to the inner man, of recognizing the presence of the Lord there and responding to him. Some call this inner communion, others call it walking in the Spirit. For him, it was the very heart of real spirituality. When you begin to live this way, even the most ordinary tasks of your day are touched by another quality. There is guidance where before there was confusion, rest where before there was anxiety, and a quiet firmness where before there was only impulsiveness. And this is only the beginning of what happens to your spirit when you practice this day after day. Watchman Nee saw something that most modern believers completely miss. You were never designed to grow alone. The entire structure of Western Christianity has trained people to think of their spiritual journey as a private expedition, a solo climb where success is measured by personal devotion, individual insight, and private breakthrough. But Watchman Nee insisted that this is a fundamental distortion, a dangerous illusion that keeps your spirit stunted even when you feel you are advancing. He taught that God never intended the Christian life to function like isolated units running parallel programs. Instead, he designed it as a living organism where every member receives life from others and supplies life to others. When you try to bypass this reality, when you practice spirituality as a self-contained project, something critical begins to die inside you. The very flow of divine life starts to congeal, your spirit becomes ingrown, and what you think is depth is often just the echo chamber of your own limited perspective. The daily practice that changes everything is not simply turning inward to your own spirit, but learning to receive from the Spirit in others and to give from the Spirit within you. Watchman Nee explains that the church is not an organization you attend, but a body you belong to, and belonging means your spiritual health is inseparably linked to the health of others. This is why isolation, even when disguised as deep personal devotion, eventually produces a peculiar kind of spiritual sickness. You begin to recycle the same revelations, repeat the same patterns, and mistake familiarity for maturity. You can read endlessly, pray fervently, and still find yourself circling the same internal territory because you have cut yourself off from the circulation of life that only flows through genuine corporate connection. The practice is this: every single day, recognize that you need what God has placed in another believer, and they need what He has placed in you. Watchman Nee warns that individualism breeds a subtle form of pride that masquerades as humility. A person thinks, "I do not want to burden anyone. I will seek God on my own. I will figure this out myself," and this sounds noble, even sacrificial. But beneath it lies an unspoken assumption: I am sufficient, I can access everything I need without depending on the body. This is exactly the opposite of how God designed spiritual life to function. He deliberately distributes His riches across many members so that no single person can claim completeness, so that everyone must come to the table both empty and full, both receiving and giving. When you practice daily connection with other believers, not superficial socializing, but genuine spiritual fellowship where spirits touch and life flows, you begin to experience something you could never manufacture alone: a depth of insight, a correction you did not see coming, a strength that is not your own, a comfort that bypasses all explanations. The tragedy Watchman Nee observed is that many believers accumulate light but never distribute it, and accumulated light that does not flow becomes stagnant, even toxic. You can have genuine encounters with God, real moments of revelation, but if you hoard them, if you keep them locked in your private journal or your personal meditation, they begin to lose their vitality. God gives you light not only for yourself, but so that it can nourish others, and in the very act of giving it away, you discover it multiplies and deepens within you. This is the mystery of corporate life. You do not lose what you share, you gain it more fully. The daily practice is to live with open hands, asking who needs to hear what God showed me, and what do I need to receive from another today. This posture breaks the cycle of spiritual constipation, where people are full of knowledge, yet starving for real transformation. Watchman Nee also teaches that the Lord uses other members to expose what you could never see in yourself. Your blind spots, your hidden pride, your unnoticed patterns, these remain invisible until you are placed in close proximity with others who carry a different portion of Christ. It is uncomfortable, even painful at times, because the body functions like a mirror and a refining fire simultaneously. But this is precisely the environment where your spirit learns to yield, where the rough edges of your soul are worn smooth, and where the life of Christ can flow without obstruction. The practice is not to avoid friction, but to embrace it as divine orchestration, recognizing that God places you among certain people not by accident, but by design, so that through daily interaction, daily giving and receiving, your spirit is shaped, stretched, and made more like His. This is what happens when you stop trying to be a complete island and start functioning as a living member of something infinitely larger than yourself. What Watchman Nee discovered about daily practice goes even deeper. It is not enough to simply acknowledge that you need others. You must learn to submit to the authority God has distributed throughout the body. This is where most people stumble, because submission sounds like weakness, like surrendering your discernment, like becoming a passive follower. But Watchman Nee saw authority completely differently. He taught that God places spiritual authority in various members, not to create hierarchy, but to establish order so that life can flow without chaos. When you resist the authority God has placed in another believer, whether through pride, independence, or hidden rebellion, you do not just harm that relationship, you actually block the very channel through which God intended to supply something essential to your spirit. The daily practice is learning to recognize where God has placed authority in your life and choosing, moment by moment, to yield to it, even when your mind argues, even when your emotions resist. This submission is not blind obedience to human personality or organizational structure. It is spiritual responsiveness to the Christ you recognize in another member. Watchman Nee makes this distinction crystal clear. You do not submit to a person's opinions, preferences, or control. You submit to the measure of Christ operating through them. And here is the mystery that transforms everything. When you genuinely submit in this way, you discover that your own spirit is released, not imprisoned. It is counterintuitive, almost paradoxical, but submission to spiritual authority actually liberates your spirit from the tyranny of your own soul, your endless reasoning, your self-protection, your need to always be right. The practice each day is to ask, where is God asking me to yield? What authority have I been resisting because it challenges my independence? And when you find it, when you bow inwardly, something profound shifts. A flow that was dammed begins to move again. Watchman Nee also emphasizes that authority is not one-directional. It circulates through the body in different expressions. Sometimes you are the one carrying authority in a specific matter, and someone must submit to what God speaks through you. Other times you are the one who must humble yourself and receive correction, insight, or direction from another. The problem arises when people lock themselves into fixed roles, always the teacher, never the student, always the strong one, never the vulnerable one, always giving, never receiving. This rigidity kills the organic flow of corporate life. The daily practice is to remain flexible, to live with open hands and an open spirit, recognizing that today you might be the vessel God uses to nourish someone, and tomorrow you might be the hungry one who needs to be fed. This fluidity keeps your spirit soft, teachable, alive. One of the most challenging aspects of this teaching is that Watchman Nee insists you cannot choose your own authority. You do not get to select the people you find easy to submit to, the ones who affirm your ideas and stroke your ego. God often places authority in the most unexpected people, those who challenge you, who see through your facades, who refuse to let you remain comfortable in your patterns. And this is precisely the point. If you could handpick your authorities, you would simply surround yourself with mirrors that reflect back what you already believe. But God, in His wisdom, places you under those who carry something you lack, those who will disturb your equilibrium precisely because you need that disturbance to grow. The practice is to stop running from discomfort, stop changing communities every time someone challenges you, and instead stay, yield, and let the friction do its sanctifying work in your spirit. Watchman Nee saw that the modern church is full of spiritual orphans, people who belong to no one, submit to no one, and therefore receive from no one in any deep transformative way. They drift from teaching to teaching, gathering information but never truly being shaped. The daily practice that changes this is covenant commitment, choosing specific believers, a specific expression of the body, and saying, I will stay here, I will submit here, I will let my spirit be tested and refined here. This is not about trapping yourself in toxic environments. It is about refusing the consumer mentality that treats the body of Christ like a buffet, where you sample whatever appeals and discard whatever costs too much. When you root yourself, when you stop running, when you daily choose to yield to the authority and love God has placed around you, your spirit finally has the stable environment it needs to mature. And that maturity does not come from getting more teaching, It comes from learning to function as a living, submitted, connected member of something greater than yourself. The hardest truth Watchman Nee ever taught about corporate life is this: you will never know the fullness of Christ until you have been broken by his body. People love the idea of community, the warmth of fellowship, the inspiration of gathering together, but they resist the crushing pressure that comes when diverse members with different temperaments, different backgrounds, and different measures of light are forced to function as one. Watchman Nee insisted that this friction is not an accident, not a design flaw, but the very mechanism God uses to grind away the shell of your soul so that your spirit can emerge unhindered. When you live isolated, you can maintain your illusions, protect your self-image, and avoid the painful confrontations that reveal who you really are beneath the religious veneer. But when you commit to daily life in the body, when you cannot escape, cannot hide, cannot perform your way out of reality, the real you is exposed, and that exposure, though agonizing, is the doorway to genuine transformation. This is why Watchman Nee says that the cross is not only an individual experience, but a corporate one. You do not just carry your own cross, you participate in the cross that operates through the interactions, tensions, and challenges of body life. Someone misunderstands you, and instead of defending yourself, you let it die. Someone receives recognition for something you contributed, and instead of correcting the record, you let your ego be crucified. Someone speaks a hard word that pierces through your defenses, and instead of retaliating or withdrawing, you receive it as divine surgery. The daily practice is not to avoid these moments, but to recognize them as sacred appointments where God is doing in you what sermons and books could never accomplish. Each time you choose to die rather than defend, to yield rather than control, to receive rather than resist, your spirit gains ground that was previously occupied by the tyranny of self. Watchman Nee observed that many believers pray for more love, more humility, more patience, but they refuse the very environment where those qualities are forged. You cannot learn love in isolation. You learn it when someone repeatedly irritates you and you choose to love anyway. You cannot develop patience in a vacuum. You develop it when others move slower than you prefer, and you choose to wait without resentment. You cannot cultivate humility through introspection alone. You cultivate it when you are overlooked, corrected, or misunderstood, and you respond with grace instead of self-pity. The daily practice is to stop praying for virtues and start embracing the circumstances God orchestrates through body life, knowing that every difficult person, every uncomfortable situation, every moment that tests your patience is actually the answer to your prayers disguised as irritation. What transforms your spirit most profoundly is not the moments when everyone agrees with you, affirms you, or celebrates you. It is the moments when you are wrong and someone loves you enough to tell you. It is the moments when your blind spots are exposed and you have nowhere to hide. It is the moments when your weaknesses are laid bare and instead of rejection, you experience the mysterious comfort of being fully known and still fully accepted. Watchman Nee taught that this kind of authentic community, where masks come off, where pretense dies, where people speak truth wrapped in love, is rare because it is costly. It costs your pride, your need to appear strong, your addiction to control. But what you gain is priceless, a spirit that is finally free from the exhausting performance of always having to seem okay, always having to have the answers, always having to maintain the image. The daily practice that Watchman Nee discovered is choosing, again and again, to stay in the fire rather than escape it. When conflict arises, stay and work through it. When someone wounds you, stay and forgive. When you are tempted to isolate because it is easier, stay and engage. When you want to quit because the cost feels too high, stay and trust that God is doing something in your spirit that transcends your temporary comfort. This is not masochism, it is wisdom. It is the recognition that the shallow Christianity of consumer culture, where you drift from place to place seeking the perfect environment that never challenges you, produces shallow spirits. But when you root yourself, when you commit to daily life in the body, with all its messiness, all its friction, all its glorious discomfort, your spirit develops a depth, a resilience, a richness that can only come from being forged in the furnace of genuine corporate life. And this, Watchman Nee would say, is where the real work of God happens, not in the privacy of your devotional time alone, but in the collision and communion of spirits learning to carry one life together. Watchman Nee understood something that escapes most believers. The ultimate purpose of corporate life is not merely mutual support or accountability. It is the revelation of Christ himself in a way that no individual could ever manifest alone. He taught that each member carries only a fragment of Christ, a partial expression, a specific facet of his infinite nature. You might carry his compassion, another his boldness, another his wisdom, another his gentleness. No single believer contains the fullness. We are designed to need each other not just for comfort, but for completion of the vision of who Christ actually is. When you isolate yourself, when you practice spirituality as a private affair, you are essentially saying, the small portion of Christ I carry is sufficient, and in doing so, you rob yourself of seeing the magnificent whole that only emerges when the body functions together. The daily practice is to look for Christ in others, to recognize that the believer who irritates you might be carrying the exact expression of him that you lack, and that your discomfort is actually an invitation to receive something you desperately need. This is why Watchman Nee insists that maturity is not measured by how much you know, but by how well you function with others. A person can memorize scripture, understand doctrine, experience powerful encounters with God in private, and still be spiritually stunted because they have never learned to blend their life with the life flowing through other members. He compares this to an orchestra where each musician might be technically excellent when practicing alone, but the true music only emerges when they learn to listen to one another, adjust to one another, and create something together that none could produce individually. The daily practice is to approach every interaction with other believers not as social obligation, but as potential symphony, asking, how does my spirit need to harmonize with theirs today? What am I meant to contribute, and what am I meant to receive? This transforms mundane fellowship into sacred collaboration. Watchman Nee also reveals that the body has a corporate discernment that far surpasses individual insight. When you face decisions, temptations, or confusion, your own spirit can be clouded by personal desire, fear, or limited perspective. But when you bring your situation before the body, not seeking opinions from the soul level, but opening yourself to the witness of spirits who know the Lord, something remarkable happens. The fog clears. What seemed complicated becomes simple. What seemed urgent loses its grip. What seemed right is exposed as subtle deception. This is not about voting or consensus building. It is about spirits touching the same Lord and bearing witness to his mind. The daily practice is to stop making major decisions in isolation, to stop trusting only your own sense of peace, and to bring your inner life into the light of those who carry authority and discernment, allowing their spirits to confirm or challenge what you believe you are hearing. One of Watchman Nee's most profound observations is that the greatest threat to spiritual life is not obvious sin or dramatic failure, but the slow drift into self-sufficiency disguised as maturity. A person reaches a certain level of understanding, develops a consistent prayer life, gains confidence in their discernment, and subtly begins to believe they no longer need the intensity of corporate dependence they once required. They still attend gatherings, still participate, but something has shifted. They are no longer desperate for what flows through others. They have become spiritually polite rather than spiritually hungry. Watchman Nee warns that this is the beginning of death, because the moment you stop actively receiving from the body, your spirit begins to contract, your revelations become repetitive, and what you thought was maturity reveals itself as calcification. The daily practice is to guard against this subtle pride by intentionally placing yourself in positions where you must receive, where you cannot be the expert, where you are forced to acknowledge that you still desperately need what God has placed in others. The transformation that happens when you embrace this daily practice of corporate life is nothing short of miraculous. Your spirit, which once operated like a closed system recycling the same thoughts and patterns, becomes a river connected to an ocean. You find yourself thinking thoughts that are not originally yours, carrying burdens that belong to the whole body, experiencing breakthroughs that came through another's faithfulness, and contributing to victories you will never personally witness. Watchman Nee describes this as entering into the fellowship of his sufferings and the power of his resurrection in a corporate dimension, where you are no longer just an individual trying to follow Christ, but a living cell in an organism that is learning to express Christ collectively. And this is precisely what happens to your spirit when you practice this daily. It stops being a solitary spark, struggling to stay lit in the wind, and becomes part of an eternal fire that cannot be extinguished, because it burns not in isolation, but in the communion of the body that bears his name. So here is what Watchman Nee discovered, and what transforms everything once you finally grasp it. The Christianity you have been practicing in isolation, the spiritual disciplines you have been perfecting alone, the insights you have been guarding privately, they were never meant to be the fullness. They were meant to be fragments that, when joined with the fragments others carry, reveal something infinitely greater than any of us could manifest individually. Every time you chose independence over interdependence, every moment you protected your comfort instead of embracing the uncomfortable presence of those who challenge you, every instance you ran from friction instead of letting it refine you, you were not preserving your spiritual integrity, you were shrinking it. But the moment you stop living as a spiritual orphan, the moment you root yourself among imperfect people, carrying pieces of the same Christ, the moment you daily choose to submit, to receive, to give without hoarding, to stay when everything in you wants to leave, your spirit breaks free from the prison of self-sufficiency and enters the flow of a life you were always designed to live. This is not about abandoning personal devotion. It is about discovering that personal devotion finds its true purpose only when it flows into and out of the body. And if something in you has awakened as you watched this, if you recognize that you have been starving for connection while surrounded by a feast you did not know how to access, then let this moment be more than passive inspiration. Write the word together in the comments right now if you are ready to stop walking this journey alone and embrace the corporate life God designed for you. Share what God is stirring in your spirit, because your words might be the invitation someone else has been waiting for to step out of isolation. Hit that like button, not as empty ritual, but as a declaration that you are ready to live differently, to embrace the discomfort of corporate life, to let others see you and shape you. Share this video with someone who is trying to climb the mountain of faith alone, thinking independence is strength when it is actually slow starvation. And if you are hungry for more truth that disrupts comfortable Christianity and calls you into the fullness God intended, subscribe to this channel and become part of a community that refuses to settle for shadows when we were designed to burn as flame. What happens to your spirit when you practice this daily is not just personal transformation, it is the discovery that you were never meant to be a solo instrument, but one voice in an eternal symphony that reveals the heart of God Himself.